Welcome to the enigmatic and playful world of cats, where every hiss and purr hides a secret, every leap and pounce is a step in a grand scheme. Cats, these ordinary domestic creatures with extraordinary lives, full of mischief and charm. Let's delve into one such tale that's rather peculiar yet enchantingly engaging. Have you ever heard the one about a group of cats who believed themselves to be shrewd criminal masterminds? Now meet our three feline protagonists. Whiskers, Paws, and Fluffy. Whiskers, the leader of the pack, is an orange tabby brimming with cheeky plans and a knack for causing mayhem. With the smooth talk of a con artist, he can persuade his comrades to follow him anywhere. With a tail that sways like a pendulum, he wields a hypnotic influence over his companions. Then we have Paws, a snow-white Persian whose heart is as soft as his coat. A mighty force within the group, but don't let his size deceive you. His gentle purr can soothe the fiercest of creatures, or in this case, distract their unsuspecting owner, Mrs. Jenkins. Lastly, there's Fluffy, a nimble and sleek Siamese, always alert for any potential danger, or opportunities that come their way. With her sapphire blue eyes, she's their perfect scout, spotting a treat from afar. These three, seemingly ordinary cats have formed a unique alliance. They're a treat-loving gang plotting to outsmart their sweet, unsuspecting owner, Mrs. Jenkins, who despite her love for cats maintains the strict rule of one treat per day. But our furry trio has other plans. They yearn for more and are willing to employ any means necessary to get it. Huddled together under the moonlight, they whisper their plans, their eyes gleaming with mischief and anticipation. Devising ever-daring strategies, they're not just ordinary cats, they're the feline embodiment of criminal masterminds, ready to take over the world, or at least claim Mrs. Jenkins's treat jar. And so, with a glint of deviousness in their eyes, the cats begin their master plan. Now, what's a group of feline felons to do when the treats are locked in a cupboard? Our three whiskered accomplices, Whiskers, Paws, and Fluffy, are faced with this very conundrum. You see, their human, in an attempt to curb their midnight mischief, has locked away the treats in a cupboard high above the kitchen counter. But our furry friends are not easily deterred. First, we have Whiskers, the nimblest of the trio. With the agility of an Olympic gymnast, he leaps onto the counter, his eyes fixed on the prize. He stretches up, standing on his hind legs, his front paws reaching, straining, but alas, the cupboard is just out of reach. He glances around, his tail flicking in mild annoyance. Next up is Paws, the brawny one. He's got muscles where you didn't think cats could have muscles. With a determined look in his eyes, he barrels towards the counter, his paws pounding the floor like a feline freight train. He leaps, aiming to knock the cupboard door open with sheer force. But instead, he crashes into the side of the cupboard with a resounding thud, sending a shiver through the entire kitchen. Finally, we have Fluffy, the brains of the operation. She's been observing her counterparts' failed attempts with a critical eye. She decides to use an unconventional approach. With a running start, she leaps onto the fridge, from there onto the top of the cupboard. But as she reaches the very top, her balance wavers. With a surprised meow, she tumbles down, landing in a soft, fluffy heap on the floor. The kitchen is a scene of pure chaos. Pots and pans clatter on the floor, a vase lies shattered, and our feline felons sit amidst it all, looking rather disgruntled. But alas, the cupboard remains shut. It was time for Plan B. When brute force doesn't work, charm is a cat's best weapon. This, dear listeners, is a truth universally acknowledged by feline kind, and our cunning quartet of cats, Whiskers, Paws, Shadow, and Mittens, knew it all too well. In their quest to trick Mrs. Jenkins out of her coveted cat treats, they decided to employ their most potent weapon yet, their irresistible cat charm. The house, once a serene sanctuary of solitude, was now a stage for their four-part feline fiesta. Whiskers, the oldest and wisest, led the charge. He would purr like a well-tuned engine, curling around Mrs. Jenkins's ankles, a delightful obstacle in her path. His green eyes would gleam with affection, his tail swishing like a metronome set to the rhythm of love. Paws, the acrobat of the group, took to performing daring leaps from the furniture, landing with a soft thud and a triumphant meow. His antics resembled a feline rendition of the floor routines at the Olympics. Shadow, the quiet and mysterious one, would suddenly become a shadow of affection, rubbing against Mrs. Jenkins with a persistence that was both endearing and slightly alarming. It was as if he was trying to transfer his black and white coat onto her, and Mittens, the youngest and the cutest, played her part by rolling over and over, showing her fluffy belly to Mrs. Jenkins, a universal cat sign of trust and affection. Quite amused by this sudden surge of affection, Mrs. Jenkins found herself giggling at their antics. Her house had transformed into a circus of cat charm. But as the days rolled by, her hearty laughter was accompanied by a twinkle of suspicion in her eyes. For you see, Mrs. Jenkins was a woman of wisdom, having lived with cats for a good part of her life. She knew their tricks, their tendencies, and their telltale signs. Their affection, though delightful, was a bit too deliberate, a bit too persistent. But Mrs. Jenkins was no fool. She knew something was up. The jig was up. It was time for our feline friends to face the music. The day had finally come when the cat's covert operations were no longer a secret. Mrs. Jenkins, their unsuspecting owner, had stumbled upon the scene of their most recent escapade. She found herself staring wide-eyed at the spectacle before her. The treats, the toys, the telltale paw prints, it was all laid bare. The cats were caught red-pawed, their shenanigans exposed. Imagine the scene. A parade of cats frozen in their tracks, eyes as wide as saucers, their whiskers twitching in alarm. Each one wore an expression of sheer surprise, their tails puffed up like bottle brushes. The audacity of their antics had finally caught up with them. Snickers, the ringleader, had a piece of string hanging from his mouth, the evidence of his mischief not so subtly displayed. He looked like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar, only this time the cookie jar was filled with catnip toys. And then there was Whiskers, with her face buried in the treat bag, her guilty pleasure now a public spectacle. Mrs. Jenkins, for her part, was a picture of disbelief. Her mouth opened and closed, mimicking a fish out of water. It was clear that she was struggling to process the scene in front of her. For a moment she looked at the cats, her eyes darting from one guilty face to the next. The room was filled with a tense silence, the proverbial calm before the storm. But then something unexpected happened. A smile started to form on Mrs. Jenkins's face, her eyes twinkling with amusement. She looked at the guilty parties before her, their eyes still round with surprise, their tails still fluffed up in alarm. And just when it seemed like our furry felons had lost, Mrs. Jenkins did the unexpected. Turns out, Mrs. Jenkins had a soft spot for her naughty feline friends. In aftermath of the great cat caper, the cats lounged languidly, their whiskers twitching with anticipation. They had been caught red-pawed, but instead of stern admonishments and timeouts, Mrs. Jenkins was smiling. A twinkle in her eye, she shook her head in disbelief at the elaborate antics her feline family had contrived. Her laughter echoed through the house, a melodious symphony that made the cats' tails twitch with pride. She had always loved their playful spirit, their audacious curiosity. Their latest escapade had been nothing short of a masterpiece, a testament to their cunning and creativity. How could she possibly be mad? Instead, she decided to reward their effort. After all, she was not just their owner, but their biggest fan. She admired their persistence, their teamwork, their determination. The caper may not have gone as planned, but they had certainly given it their all. And so she reached into her cabinet and pulled out a tin of their favorite treats. The cat's eyes widened, their pupils dilating with pure joy. Their ears perked up at the rustling of the tin, and they purred in unison, their chorus of contentment filling the room. One by one she tossed the treats to them, each morsel a token of her affection, a tribute to their ingenuity. They pounced on them with delight, their claws clicking against the hardwood floor in their eagerness. Each treat was a triumph, a tangible testament to their victory. Their satisfaction was palpable, their joy contagious. As they savored bite, their purrs grew louder, their tails swishing in blissful satisfaction. They had outsmarted their owner, and instead of punishment, they had earned a reward. Their caper had been a success, a delicious triumph. And so the great cat caper ended not in defeat, but in a delicious victory. Want more interesting feline facts and captivating cat capers? Don't forget to subscribe.